By 1920, the country was changing as fast as automobiles rolled off Henry Ford's assembly line. As fast as the girls in the steno pool could type the quick brown fox. Our schools, too, were accelerating. Since the turn of the century, new high schools had been opening at the rate of 1 per day. Now there were kindergartens for 5-year-olds and junior highs for adolescents. As the system expanded, so did the bureaucracy.
If you add a library, then you'll need a chief librarian for the school system. If you start providing lunch, you'll need somebody in charge of food services. If you start providing transportation, you'll need somebody in charge of transportation services. Instead of having just teachers, you suddenly have separate math and science teachers. Well, then you have to have a department of math teachers. Then you have to have a chairman for math teachers and a supervisor of math teachers. So the more complex the organization, the more bureaucratized it gets, then bureaucracy begets itself.
Enter a new breed of progressive educators, steeped in the cult of efficiency. Elwood P. Cubberly had started out as a teacher in a one-room Indiana schoolhouse. He came to regard this one-size-fits-all education as woefully out of date.
We should give up the exceedingly democratic idea that all are equal and that our society is devoid of classes. The employee tends to remain an employee. The wage earner tends to remain a wage earner. One bright child may easily be worth more to the national life than thousands of those of low mentality.
Head of the Department of Education at Stanford University, Cubberly trained a generation of administrators in what was called the science of school management. Public high schools in the early 1900s had given all students the same classical college prep curriculum. In the 1920s, they were revamped as administrators like Cubberly introduced career tracking.
During that era, educators embraced the idea that the college-bound program was only for the very smart kids and that everybody else should be divided up and given a different kind of program depending on where they expected to be in their life. So many girls were put into a household arts curriculum. Many of the boys were put into an industrial education program because it was assumed that they would be factory workers. Many others were put into a commercial program because they would be clerks.
People began to think of going to school as a way of getting a job, not as going to school to become a wise person or being a consumer of literature. And in fact, they talked about, does a bricklayer really need to know Shakespeare? Only those who are going on to college should study Shakespeare, and for bricklayers, we'll give them a different type of English to study.
What school administrators needed was an efficient way to sort through growing numbers of students. They turned to a test designed to measure a student's intelligence quotient, or IQ. Developed in France, IQ tests were popularized by a colleague of Cubberly's at Stanford, psychologist Louis Terman.
Louis Terman believed that the intelligence test was a technology that could transform America and help it achieve a utopia. In Terman's view, if we could use the test to assess every child in the public schools, we would have a better understanding of each individual's ability or capacity and create a kind of social efficiency for the country.
You have to understand about IQ testers. They're very idealistic. They're sort of social visionaries who want to use the school system to create a society in which people are ruled by those with high IQ scores.
During World War I, Herman and a group of psychologists had field tested their exam on 1.7 million U.S. Army recruits. Scores on word and picture problems helped to determine which men would be assigned desk jobs in Washington and which men would be sent to the trenches in France. Psychologists concluded that the average mental age of American adults was 13.7 years. They also claimed that ethnicity affected intelligence. These controversial theories would have a major impact on schools.
The test scores of different ethnic groups were ordered from Anglo-Saxon to Italian to Polish to Native American to African Americans. And so there was this sense that IQ tests could be used to determine the quality of people by ethnicity, by race, by class. And so the very belief in the capacity of people to learn was undermined, particularly by psychologists like Terman.
By the 1920s, over 1 million children were being tested each year. Questions were designed to measure mental aptitude rather than academic achievement. Some were highly subjective.
True or false? We seldom desire food when we are very sad. True or false? A large man is always braver than a small one.
Terman had a great flair for dealing with school districts, for dealing with the media. He had this project where he derived the IQs of famous figures throughout history, which is scientifically a complete crock, but got huge pickup in the media and really helped to popularize the idea of IQ as the crucial human quality.
In the early 1800s, Thomas Jefferson had called upon schools to rake the best geniuses from the rubbish. In the 1920s, the Los Angeles schools were using IQ tests to spot future leaders. They found Russell Robinson, whose score of 145 put him in the top 0.5% of American students.
I found school very easy. I liked some subjects particularly, physics and chemistry and mathematics.